Hello, my name is Kriwel Shula, and I wanted to share with you all the Welsh Shula family's passion project. I just got a letter from our school district that was talking about assignments and grading and talking about working out with teachers' passion projects to count towards grades. So this is going to be kind of dual duty. I'm going to share with you all what our passion project is, but I'm also going to share some tips and tricks for other parents to encourage both physical, mental, and cognitive health during this COVID-19 stay-at-home order. I have been involved in education for a long time. I have over hundreds of hours of training and experience in early childhood development and early childhood psychology. I've worked as a Head Start teacher. I've worked as an immersion school teacher. I've worked um, at the college level, and I actually train a lot of teachers, language teachers specifically. And so I do have some background in this, so hopefully this will be helpful for many people. So I will go ahead and get going. So first thing I want to talk about is hormones. Cortisol. Cortisol is a stress hormone. It serves its purpose, but in large amounts, more than your body needs, it becomes toxic and it can shut down learning. It can shrink. It can physically shrink the size of your brain, and it can cause anxiety and depression. And then we have endorphins. And endorphins are feel-good chemicals released by the brain when the reward center is triggered, and it improves your immune system. It increases brainwave activity, and so it helps your brain to learn, and it actually can protect brain cells. And I'll be going back and forth talking about brain cells and neurons, which is the same thing, and those synaptic connections. Normally I talk about what those are, but I want to keep this as short as possible, so I'm not going to explain the function of brain cells and synaptic connections and all of that. So the first thing that I want to talk about in regards to what we're going to be doing as a family is we are going to be increasing our physical activity. So any kind of exercise, they've been jumping on the trampoline, they've been playing soccer, they've been taking little walks and digging roots and all that kinds of stuff. So movement increases blood flow. And blood carries oxygen to your brain. So the more oxygen that you have going to your brain, the higher your mental performance. There is many, many, many benefits to exercise, which I will go over right now. So briefly, I will tell you what brain-derived neurotrophic factor is, and that is a protein, a neurotrophin that gets secreted from the body. And what that protein does is it actually protects brain cells and connections. And so it is very essential for learning and memory. So exercise enhances cognition because it increases those BD and Fs. It stimulates brain cells and connections and those chemicals for the transmission of information, and it improves learning and mental performance. So this is all benefits of exercise and movement. And so it actually grows brain cells. Exercise can grow brain cells. It increases the neurons or brain cells in the hippocampus, and the hippocampus is responsible for learning and memory. It's also a big part in like emotions and emotional control and regulation. It protects brain functions for increased health, and it increases connections among existing neural pathways, and it increases brain organization and integration. So here's some other cognition. If you don't know, cognition is thought processes such as making decisions, regulating your emotions, paying attention, controlling your behavior, focusing, multitasking. That's all up here. This is your cognition. And so exercise enhances mental performance, your memory, your learning, your attention, your decision making. It increases your adaptivity, so your ability to respond to new situations in a good way. It increases your executive function, which again is all that controlling your emotions and making decisions. It improves arousal and vigilance, which means you're more engaged and you're more wanting to do. So you're wanting to engage more with whatever you're doing. It increases cellular function, it decreases distraction, and it improves the process of putting thought into action. It improves the ability to put patterns into sequences, so letters into words, words into sentences. It improves, enhances short-term working memory, increased long-term potentiality, physiological strengthening of the brain as a result of dendritic branches, which means that your brain cells are, their pathways, their little connections are reaching out to each other, so they're making more connections. And then staved off symptoms and signs of dementia for those of you who are, or those of us who are getting older. Improved academic performance, improved reading and math scores, reading comprehension and analysis, higher IQ scores, higher grade point average in adolescence, enhanced creativity, intensified focus in the classroom, improved problem solving skills, reduced truancy and dropout rates. This is all exercise. I'm still just on exercise and increasing your movement. Okay, so there are 6 pathways to the brain. 5 of them is just your senses, and the 6th one is doing something, physically practicing doing something. And so I will kind of hit those as we go through this presentation. Okay, so land, nature, and outdoors. I am speaking specifically from an Indigenous perspective, although the information in here could be great for all children. I'm going to be touching on some things that are specific to Native American children. Green spaces, so tribally, that's where our language itself comes from the animals, it comes from the land. That's where our languages were born, that's where we lived prior to colonization. So exposure to green spaces have been shown to improve brain development in children. So here's a study that says lifelong exposure to greenness was positively associated with gray matter volume in the left and right prefrontal cortex. So what gray matter is in your brain, you know how your brain's really wrinkly? There's an outer layer that's where your brain cells sit, is in the outside, in those folds of your brain. So gray matter is basically the density of your brain cells. So the more gray matter volume you have, the more brain cells you have. So they actually show a connection with higher density of gray matter and exposure to green spaces. So my kids are outdoors like almost all day long. So we've been doing a lot of outdoor play, which is for us, we're lucky because we sit on 3 acres of land and we have, you know, a fenced yard, and, you know, not everybody has that opportunity, but we do. So they spend a lot of time outdoors. I show them different plants that they can get. They've been gathering stuff for me. They have a name giving coming up this fall. So I've been asking them to gather pine needles to make baskets. And they've been digging squinquinum, which is Indian potatoes, to eat. Okay. So outdoor exploration stimulates all of the senses. So when I was talking about before, there's 6 pathways to the brain. Outdoors will stimulate all of those pathways. It allows them to observe cause and effect, varying textures, sensations, temperatures, and observe natural phenomena which stimulate or reinforce neural connections, your brain cell connections. So there's also sunlight. Sunlight gets perceived through the eye regulation, production of melatonin and serotonin for circadian rhythm control, and also plays a role in seasonal affective disorder. So melatonin is your body's chemical to help you sleep. And so what it does is it helps you get better sleep. And everybody knows that the higher quality you sleep you get, the better you perform cognitively. So it increases your quality of sleep, and it produces serotonin. And serotonin is an endorphin, which we talked about earlier, that helps protect your lower stress, improves cognitive function, and it also helps with depression. Okay, it also gives you vitamin D. So every single tissue and cell in your body has vitamin D receptors. And vitamin D plays a major role in the production of oxytocin, which is another endorphin in your brain. That oxytocin, they call it the love hormone, and not OxyContin, but oxytocin, and it promotes trust, bonding, relationships, and it, like before, it's an endorphin, so it does all the benefits that I've talked about with the endorphins. Okay, soil contains good bacteria, and this bacteria also triggers the production of serotonin, and it increases mood and cognitive function. So this is an experiment that was done that revolved around walking in an arbor green spaces. And what they found is that just taking that walk improved executive attention skills, such as short-term memory, and it also had mental health improvements as well. And so it really does improve cognitive function. Okay, so here's another outdoors experiment. So there's some schools that are called, I believe they're called nature exploration classrooms. And so they did a study on these children who are about Head Start age. And what they did was they sent these children outside and they gave them little tools, but mainly the environment was nature. They made sure that there was a lot of different types of nature materials, living organisms, open-ended kind of play. And so what they found is that these children who were not given instruction, so the teacher's role was just to kind of ask questions and encourage different types of thinkings, but they didn't have them do anything. They let the children decide what they wanted to do. So what they found, then the teachers observed and wrote down notes on what the kids were doing. So what they found is that these children on their own worked on these sub-themes in developing mathematical skills. So classification, estimation, geometric shapes, one-to-one correspondence counting, whole part relationships, scale relationships, sequencing and seriation, volume, time concepts, computational skills, matching, fractions, numbers and counting, quantity, and measurements. Now these are 4-year-olds that are just doing what they want to do in nature. So here's just a picture of some patterns and shapes in nature. And patterns are super important for young children because in math, especially because math is generally just solving a pattern. And so if they can start identifying patterns and working with patterns at early ages, it really builds the foundation that they need to understand algebra and all these other advanced math skills later on. Patterns and seriation. So here's an example of a cedar, a piece of cedar off of a tree, how it goes from big to small. Okay, so still on outdoors and nature. So science is basically the study of structure and the behavior of the physical and natural world through observation and experiment. This was still with the nature exploration classroom. They showed that this is some of the science skills that they learned in addition to those math skills. They use close observation skills to compare the attributes of items to determine which nature items best fit their needs for whatever they decided to be working on. Children had many opportunities to investigate and physically experience the scientific concepts of gravity and weight as they explored objects in their bodies and physically manipulated materials in the nature exploration classroom. In January, children experienced with the force of gravity as they worked with water. So I wanted to talk about my own experiences. I did not go to school until I was in the 2nd grade. The only 2 grades I finished was the 4th and the 8th grade from start to finish, and then I dropped out when I was 15. So that's my own educational background. I do have my degree and all of that, but as far as a public education, that's kind of sums it up. So that being said, which means the land was my first teacher. So when I was little, my parents had some elder speakers over at our house, and they wanted to bring them down to, we had an earth lodge. And so between the house and the earth lodge, there was a path similar to this one, a little bit steeper. And so there was dry pine needles all over it. And so I remember thinking, okay, I need to get on that path before they come down, and I need to remove the pine needles off of the path because I don't want them to slip and fall because they're elders. And so now thinking back on it, I understood the concept of physics and static friction because I understood that dry earth with dry pine needles sitting on top of it, there's no friction there and they could slip and fall. And so I learned about friction long before I was ever taught in a public school and given the technical terms for it. Same with mass density of matter. One time, these are sweat lodge rocks. One time my parents went and got sweat rocks and they dumped them, and we had to carry them to where our sweat lodge was. And so they asked me, I was about 7 years old, they asked me to help. And so I went over there and I picked one up, and I was really surprised why it was so light due to its size. And so what my mom explained to me is that there's like air pockets in it, and so it doesn't have as much rock as like a solid rock would, and so it's lighter. And so that was my first experience with mass density of matter. In addition to some of our legends that we have, some of our stories. In this little story, it's about Coyote loses his eyes and he needs to find water to get something to drink, and he talks to the plants. And the plants, he knows which plants grow near water and which plants are far away from water, and he talks to them to lead himself to the water. And that's traditional ecological knowledge. That's really complex knowledge that we have, and that gets passed on. Science and all of that, those concepts get passed on through our legends, which right now we stop telling legends just because of the time of year. But we have a lot of knowledge, right? Like right now, the time is the time that we go dig, the time that we go gather medicines. So there's a lot of ethnobotany involved in this time of year with gathering, traditional gathering. And then just having healthy relationships, just having that connection, having the time and the energy to sit down and connect with people. Having social and emotional connections with people triggers production of oxytocin in the brain, and we're lucky here that we have a large family, so there's lots of people to connect to. Positive social interactions reduces productions of cortisol, increases productions of oxytocin, which we've talked about. Oxytocin is an endorphin. Cortisol is a stress hormone that can shrink your brain. Positive touch like a hug, handshake, hand on the shoulder can trigger oxytocin production. Which, I've been, I hear people on Facebook talk about how they're like fighting with their kids, trying to get them to do their packets, fighting with their kids, trying to get them to do their online assignments. And then it's stressing both the parent and the child out. And so that is why I do not, we're doing this passion project, and I'm explaining to you what we're doing to promote cognitive, emotional, and physical health. I'm going to skip this one. So mindfulness. I'm going to explain what mindfulness is. Prayers bring you into the present moment, thereby forming a deeper, more intimate connection to spirit. That is the whole purpose of mindfulness practice, is to bring you into the present moment. So prayer and having a ceremonial mindset, and what I mean by ceremonial mindset is you have to think about what you're feeling, because if you're feeling negative thoughts, if you're feeling grouchy or crabby, you can put that energy onto other people. And so with our culture, we have to reframe our mind to be positive when we do certain things, so that what we do is beneficial to people and not harmful. And so and this is a quote from my mom. She has her master's in counseling psychology, and she has her PhD as well. So she's a very educated woman, and that is her explanation on mindfulness. And so here's some of the research that backs that up. So I mentioned briefly before that the hippocampus is the learning center of the brain. It has so much to do with learning, memory, and emotions. So people who practice mindfulness have higher density of gray matter in their learning, memory, and emotion center of the brain. So I explained earlier, gray matter is your brain cell density. So mindfulness positively contributes to brain activity that deals with executive function. This is all up here: emotional regulation, memory, decision-making, problem solving. Like, those are huge, especially if you're a teacher in this modern age with technology and you have kids who have like super short attention spans. This is super important. We deal with a lot of like drug affected or alcohol affected kids, and that really impacts their executive function. And so this is super helpful for kids who have those issues as well. Music. in the brain. Stanford study shows that music engages areas of the brain which are involved with paying attention, making predictions, and updating events in our memory. So here's a picture of all the parts of your brain that gets activated when we listen to music. So when we listen to music, it triggers our whole brain, almost our whole brain. So music and math, young children provided with instrumental instruction score significantly higher on tasks measuring spatial temporal cognition, hand-eye coordination, and arithmetic. Part of this is due to the amount of overlap between music skills and math skills. Musical experiences strengthen many of the same aspects of brain function that are impaired in individuals with language and learning difficulties, such as neural timing precision, which allows differentiation between speech syllables. Music also correlates with reading abilities through practice of maintaining rhythm. So they did this study on children. I can't remember what those little things are called that tick back and forth, that sit on a piano, tick, tick, tick. They use one of those things. And then they had children tap to the rhythm of the ticking. And what they found is that children who could hit that rhythm, who could follow the tempo, had better reading skills than the children who had a harder time being able to do that. So let's see. So the point of that, the connection to that is dancing. So when we coordinate our bodies in with music or sound and we're dancing to a beat like that, we're maintaining that rhythm, and it helps our brain with reading skills. Okay, so this is, you can see this looks like a pretty complex pattern. It starts up here in this left-hand corner, goes here like this, and then it comes back up here and it repeats like that. So what this is actually a visual representation of a stick game song. And I believe this is actually a really simple stick game song. This is not even a complicated, some songs can get really complicated. So forgive my singing, I'm just gonna sing it to you really quick just so you can see. This says, ho, 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 yo, ho, 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 yo, ho, 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 yo, ha, ha, hi, ya, ha, ha, hi, ya. And then it repeats 4 times. Well, as much time, this is a stick game song, so it doesn't matter how many times it repeats. But what you can see is that when we sing songs, it's not just random sounds and, sounds and rhythms. These are very complicated structures. So when you put it on paper like this, you can see kind of what's happening in our brain, that we're able to keep those rhythms. It's all symmetrical. Like it's actually very mathematical, and it can vary in complexity depending on the type of song that you're singing. This is a super simple stick game song. Super simple, and it looks like a really complicated pattern, which is so important for math skills, like I explained earlier. Okay, so dancing, basically a lot of it has to do with the benefits that I talked about exercise before. Dancing is exercise, so everything I said about exercise and movement earlier also relates to dancing. Increases your heart rate, your blood flow, the oxygen's going to your brain. It secretes that protein that maintains and protects neurons, triggers the productions of endorphins, which can mitigate the cortisol, increases the state of mood conducive to learning, and it increases neuronal, it can birth brain cells. And then in addition to the keeping the tempo and the reading connection. Oh, there it is again. So finding that auditory motor synchronization ability correlates with reading skills in normal developing population lends support to the idea that reading and the perception of rhythm relied on shared processes. So here's another example. I'm not sure if how many people, like non-natives, are aware that like powwow dancing actually has a lot to do with symmetry. So at least from my knowledge, I haven't danced in a long time, but or at least not, I mean, I dance, but not like at powwows, or, I'm not considered an expert at dancing, but what I was taught is that everything's symmetrical. What you do on one side, also you have to do on the other side. So if you do certain steps, these are different kinds of steps. If you do certain steps, all of it needs to be symmetrical. And so if you do however many steps on one side, you got to remember what you just did. which is really, you have to hold that in your working memory, which is insanely good for your executive function. And so then you hold that and then you repeat that pattern on this other side. In addition to all the movement that you see around you as you're dancing, it's simultaneously stimulating both sides of your brain, and you're actually can strengthen your what is this thing called again? I'll think of it. But it's really important. Okay. Oh, so here's some things that you can learn. Even if you were to teach somebody like a jingle choreography, which when I was little, my mom, she would teach us like the choreography of it, and we would practice. And so you can practice one-to-one correspondence counting, rote counting, your spatial intelligence, patterning, sequencing, geometry, rhythm, all of that can just be with dancing. Art. So looking at gorgeous painting, sculpture, or other artwork increases blood flow to the brain by as much as 10%, the equivalent to looking at someone you love, which I talked about earlier, that blood flow. When it increases blood flow, you're getting more oxygen to the brain. Researchers liken creating art with exercise for the brain, and even suggest that similar to how physical exercise aids the body, creating art may help keep the mind sharp and lucid well until old age, and it can also reduce stress. And art, culturally is, again, it's very mathematical. Teaching, it has to do with patterning and geometry. And so teaching patterns at a young age is important. Introducing images and shapes helps with mathematical thinking. And then lastly, humor. This is a protein dragging and an endorphin. So humor reduces cortisol and it increases the mood state that is conducive to learning. So what our passion project is getting more movement and physical exercise, being outdoors and interacting with nature. We got a garden. We started some seeds. They're digging. So we have all our plants. We actually have been using the school when they drop off the lunches, those little milk cartons, we empty them out and we open them up. And so that's what we're using as seed starter containers. Let's see, movement, outdoors, praying, smudging, all of that, gathering, and just enjoying each other's company, not stressing out. And we're just taking this time, like we don't have any video games. We don't have internet, so they can't really do a whole lot as far as that goes. But we've just been working on everything I have just talked about. So during this time, we are going to enjoy one another, and we are going to do all of these things that I just presented on. And so what I would encourage other parents to do as well is to not stress and not, the assignments that your kids get, I would not worry about it being a fight, because that's just going to increase your guys' stress, both for you and your child. It's not going to be good for the brain. It's not going to be good for you. And so, I told you guys my public school education, I didn't start till second grade, dropped out when I was 15. I was in and out of school in between there. And so I think that 2 to 3 months of not being in a public school, the kids are going to be okay. And especially if you do some of these tips and trust in the land, trust in the earth, trust in prayer, trust in our culture, and everything will be all right. I hope that you enjoyed this presentation, and I hope it gave you some really cool ideas what to do with your kids. And I really love this quote by Sitting Bull. It says, "Let us put our minds together and see what life we can make for our children." So if you want to reach out to me as well, or share with other people what you're doing with your kids that relates to some of this, I think the more ideas we can all get, the better. And that is all I have. So thank you for listening to me, and please stay safe and healthy during this time. Don't stress out too much and everything will be all right. Thank you.